We like to imagine that law stands above power. That law is neutral, rational, clean. That it protects us from those who would dominate. But history tells a more uncomfortable story. In the ancient world, law did not descend from abstract principles. It descended from strength. The king conquered, and then he codified. The empire expanded, and then it legalized its expansion. Take the Code of Hammurabi. It is often praised as one of the earliest legal systems. But its authority did not come from moral consensus. It came from a ruler who had already consolidated control. Law formalized power after power had already won. The same pattern appears in ancient Athens. Democracy is celebrated. Yet even there, political participation was restricted. Law reflected the structure of power: citizens over non-citizens, men over women, free over enslaved. The law did not float above the hierarchy. It organized it. Power first, law second. This is not cynicism. It is structural observation. And then comes the philosophical rupture. Socrates appears in Athens and does something strange. He obeys the law even when it condemns him. He refuses to escape prison. He argues that the laws of the city are like parents, they shaped him. If he undermines them, he undermines the very order that made him possible. But here is the tension: the law executed the most honest man in the city. So what is law? Justice? Or organized authority? Fast forward to Rome. Roman law becomes a monumental achievement, systematic, rational, durable. But it is inseparable from imperial power. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, was peace enforced by legions. Law traveled with the army. Again, power creates stability, stability produces law, law legitimizes power. Medieval Europe shifts the framework. Now law claims divine authority. Kings rule by the grace of God. Law becomes sacred. Yet this sacredness shields power rather than limits it. The divine justification strengthens hierarchy. Then something radical happens in early modern thought. Philosophers begin to reverse the direction. Thomas Hobbes imagines a chaotic state of nature where life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. For him, individuals surrender power to a sovereign to escape chaos. Law is born from fear of disorder. Power is centralized to prevent worse violence. John Locke changes the tone. He argues that government exists to protect natural rights, life, liberty, property. If rulers violate these rights, they lose legitimacy. This is a revolution in thinking. Now law is supposed to bind power. Now authority is conditional. Now power is justified only if it serves pre-existing principles. The American and French revolutions attempt to embody this reversal. Constitutions are written. Separation of powers is invented. Rights are codified. The dream becomes clear: law above power. But here is where your paradox emerges. Who writes the Constitution? Those who already hold influence. Who interprets the Constitution? Institutions staffed by people selected through political processes shaped by existing power structures. Even when law is designed to restrain power, power is still present at the moment of design. Michel Foucault would later argue that power is not merely held by rulers. It flows through institutions, language, norms, education. Law is not outside power, it is one of its instruments. Even when law claims neutrality, it shapes behavior, defines categories, and creates identities. Think of modern bureaucratic states. Law regulates nearly every aspect of life. It promises equality before the law. Yet access to legal defense, influence over legislation, and capacity to navigate institutions vary dramatically. In theory, law disciplines power. In practice, power influences law. This is not conspiracy. It is structural gravity. Power does not disappear when we declare equality. It reorganizes. In democracies, power fragments. It is dispersed among branches, parties, media, corporations, citizens. But dispersion is not elimination. Economic power influences political campaigns. Cultural power shapes public opinion. Technological power rewrites what is even possible. Law attempts to stabilize these forces. It sets boundaries. It defines what is permitted. It punishes violations. But law is always reactive. It responds to power shifts. Consider the rise of digital technology. Platforms grow faster than regulation. Data becomes currency. Only after concentration of influence becomes visible do governments attempt to regulate. Again, power expands first. Law follows. Your intuition that power still creates law is not naive. It reflects a recurring historical pattern. Yet the reverse is also partially true. Law can discipline power, but only when institutions are strong enough and when citizens defend them. Courts can overturn executive actions. Investigative journalism can expose corruption. Public protest can reshape legislation. So the relationship is dynamic, not linear. Power creates law. Law shapes power. Power reshapes law. A loop, not a hierarchy. Here is the deeper philosophical question: is law ever independent of power? If law requires enforcement, it requires force. Even the most just law depends on coercive capacity. Without police, courts, or some mechanism of enforcement, law becomes suggestion. So law cannot be entirely separate from power. It needs it. But if power is unconstrained, it becomes arbitrary. It becomes tyranny. So power cannot be legitimate without law. This mutual dependency is the paradox. They belong to each other. Carl Schmitt, a controversial political theorist, argued that sovereignty is revealed in the exception, the moment when someone decides to suspend normal law in a crisis. In emergencies, power shows its primacy. The one who declares the exception stands above the law. Modern states still reveal this structure. During crises, war, terrorism, pandemics, extraordinary powers expand. Rights may be restricted temporarily. The justification is survival. Once again, power stretches the frame of law. And yet, societies demand a return to normal order. Law reasserts itself. The oscillation continues. There is also a psychological layer. Human beings seek security and freedom simultaneously. Security requires order. Order requires authority. Authority requires power. But freedom demands limitation of that power. So we construct law as a boundary. We want a guardian strong enough to protect us, but weak enough not to dominate us. That is a near impossible balance. Democracy attempts to solve this through procedural legitimacy. Elections rotate leadership. Transparency exposes abuse. Independent courts review decisions. But procedures themselves can be influenced. Information ecosystems fragment. Economic disparities distort representation. The ideal of law above power becomes fragile when trust erodes. The deeper issue may not be that power creates law. It may be that power is ineradicable. Even in small communities, informal power exists: charisma, wealth, knowledge, reputation. Law formalizes some of these dynamics, but cannot erase them. So perhaps the dream of separating law from power entirely is misguided. Maybe the real question is not how to eliminate power from law, but how to distribute power so widely that no single concentration can dominate the legal structure. This is the insight behind checks and balances. It is also the insight behind civic culture. Law functions best not merely when written well, but when supported by norms, habits, and expectations internalized by citizens. If people do not believe in the legitimacy of law, enforcement alone cannot sustain it. Power without legitimacy breeds fear. Law without enforcement breeds irrelevance. The modern crisis you sense, we use law to make power obey, and it doesn't go so well, reflects strain in this equilibrium. When institutions are perceived as captured, when economic influence seems disproportionate, when political actors manipulate rules for advantage, trust weakens. And law depends on trust. Because most compliance with law is voluntary. We stop at red lights not because a police officer stands at every intersection, but because we accept the rule. If acceptance dissolves, enforcement must increase. When enforcement increases, power becomes more visible. When power becomes more visible, suspicion grows. The loop tightens. Yet history also shows resilience. Constitutional democracies have endured wars, depressions, internal conflict. They adapt. Amendments are written. Precedents evolve. Rights expand over centuries. The abolition of slavery, the extension of suffrage, civil rights movements, these are moments when law was reshaped against entrenched power structures. But note carefully, these changes required organized counterpower. Social movements mobilized numbers, moral argument, economic pressure. Power confronted power. Law shifted when the balance shifted. So perhaps the clean dichotomy dissolves. Law is crystallized power, power that has been stabilized, codified, and justified. Power is law in motion, law that is being contested, expanded, or redirected. They are not enemies. They are phases of the same phenomenon. The real danger emerges when power detaches from accountability, when it can create law without opposition, or suspend it without consequence. And the real strength of a political order emerges when law can channel power rather than merely mask it. The paradox you describe may never fully disappear. Every generation inherits structures shaped by previous concentrations of power. Each generation attempts to refine them. Sometimes it succeeds. Sometimes it fails. But the tension itself is productive. Without power, law cannot act. Without law, power cannot justify itself. The health of a society depends not on eliminating this tension, but on keeping it visible. When people forget that law is intertwined with power, they become naive. When they believe power alone determines everything, they become cynical. Between naivete and cynicism lies vigilance. Perhaps that is the modern task, not to pretend law stands above power, nor to surrender to the idea that power always corrupts law, but to recognize their entanglement, and to consciously shape the balance. The paradox is real. It may never resolve. But paradoxes are not always failures. Sometimes they are structural features of complex systems. Law and power belong to each other. The question is not whether power creates law. The question is who holds power, and how transparently it can be challenged. And that question is never settled. Thank you for watching. This is the Human Pattern Project, where we examine the structures behind human behavior and civilization.